Intentional weight loss, a happy, healthy life.
Hello there and welcome to the next video session of the Lose Weight for Good program. Today is a really crucial video that we're going to need to put together. I'm really sorry to say this one may be a bit longer, so my expectation is that this session will be sort of 20, maybe even 25 minutes long. We're going to deal with such a big subject, which is habit, and I just can't deal with it in the right way and make this a 5-minute, 10-minute kind of consumable. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me. It won't happen very often, but with this particular one it will be a longer video. If I can find a way of making it quicker I will, but I'm not sure that's possible. So the question that I always ask myself when I start working into habits is how much of my life do I actually live without thinking? And after I started doing some research into psychology and some research into habits, I was somewhat concerned to find that the answer to that is somewhere in the region of 40% of my life is spent without thinking about this stuff. And I think a lot of us would recognise this. So I tell you a true story about myself. When I come out of my house and go out towards the main road, to the main highway, I actually always have to turn right, and I'm always going, when I go right, I'm going onto the major highway. Actually, except for when I go onto the gym. When I go to the gym, in fact, I turn right and then I have to turn left. And every single time I went to the gym, I would find myself going towards the motorway because my brain had kind of switched off. I was in my subconscious. I would really discounted having to pay attention too much to that kind of thing, as so many drivers do. They get to work and they go, how did I get here? What? How have I actually managed to get here? This is working with our subconscious. And a lot of what we do is in the subconscious. Some of it is actually based around our brain's desire to want to make the day as easy as possible to get through. And it goes into kind of low, only if there's a major emergency type situation does it come alive again. Other times it's to do with social pressure and peer pressure. Now, the next part of what I need you to do will be in a moment when I've given you some instructions. I want you to pause the video and actually go onto YouTube for me. So there is an absolutely fantastic video by one of my favourite people called Derren Brown, and that's D-E-R-R-E-N, Derren Brown. And he did a famous video called The Bell Test. And I'd like you to go and watch The Bell Test. Watch it now. It is 6 minutes long, but actually you probably only need to watch about the first 3.5 to get the gist about what it is we're trying to do, and you will see a fantastic video. So if you can go and watch that video now, I'll be really pleased, because I'm going to come back to this video in a moment and I don't want to spoil the video for you. So you can put it on pause at that point, and then we'll go forward. So let's assume now that you've watched that video. The key part about the Bell Test and why people came in and stood up and sat down and stood up and sat down, even though no one had given them any instruction at all to do that, was totally to do with this pressure of wanting to conform to society. And in fact, there's been a lot of studies that have proved that if your 5 closest friends put on 10 pounds, truly 10 pounds in weight, you will be far more likely to put on 10 pounds in weight as well. Because actually, as people socially conform, they like to mix in with everybody and have similar experiences, similar eating patterns. You can see how it all works. And actually, if you're the friend who, working with your social group, actually says, do you know what? Nope, I'm going to be the one that's going to say, actually, I'm going to live a healthy lifestyle. Actually, you have a much greater chance of affecting the social group that you're with. And the reason why I like people to start thinking about the Bell Test and about why that works is the important position that they play in their social groups, and how they can influence so positively by making some really small and minor little changes. And I've seen that in my own social group. I am obviously much more focused on health and weight than I ever used to be in the past. And actually all of my friends are as well, because they've seen the benefit effects of it, they've followed it, and now we make different choices together, and it's a self-supporting group. So a group before that didn't used to support each other in this way, now support each other in this way. But it's really important to understand that peer pressure is a very important part of how we learn, and it starts driving habitual behaviour. So think about our children. Our children all learn because they see us, they want to conform in the way that we work, right? All follows onwards. It all follows onwards. So everything we do becomes really important. And remember that we're forming habits in people all the time. However, when it comes to pure habits, we have hundreds of them. So make sure you've got your notebooks out, because I'm going to be asking you to do some things during this session. But some just great examples of habits that we kind of all get into. How many of you actually get out of bed the same side? Now, for some of you, the bed might be against the wall, so getting out might be a problem. But majority of us choose to get out of bed the same side. We kind of have a routine in the morning that we don't vary. So most of us would get up and either then go to the bathroom or weigh ourselves or go and have breakfast and then brush our teeth and da-da-da. But actually very rarely do we vary it. So it's a very strict routine that we follow, and we do that for exactly the reason that I was telling you earlier when I was driving, that my brain's kind of switched down. It doesn't have to think about that, so it keeps us energetic, keeps us kind of safe, don't have to think about it. But that's great when your mind is working in that kind of really low energy way of working, if it's doing things that support a good and healthy lifestyle. The challenge becomes, of course, when your subconscious is actually making you do things that are really counterintuitive to what's good for you. One of the other things I always think is quite funny, I was brought up in a world where people said, isn't it so romantic that this lovely older couple can finish each other's sentences? In fact, actually, there's very little romance about it. It's the fact that each other have heard each other finish those sentences so many times. They are so habitual. They know what they're going to say. They have not grown together. They've just been listening to it so many times that after 40 years, they know what they're going to say, because they always say the same thing. And in fact, you can start, even if you want to play a little social experiment, you will find that certain people, every time you say to them, "How are you?" will immediately look you in the eye, just because it's socially expected, and say, "I'm fine, how are you?" And I like a little experiment now where I even look at people and say, "No, truly, this is the third time running that I've asked you that question, and you've given me exactly the same answer. How are you really?" And actually, the depth of relationships I've been able to have when I understand habitual behaviours in other people has really helped me develop much closer and deeper relationships with people. So I know that's nothing to do with weight, but it's a useful thing that you want to think about. What habitual behaviours do you see in others? Coming back to food though, how many of you have got certain brands that you always buy? And they're your favourites. They're your favourites. Of course, the fact that there have been 20 new products in that line and you've never tried them, they're still your favourites. They're your habits. They are your habits. And one of the things that advertisers like to do is to help us understand the power of making something our favourite, then makes it our habit, and therefore we don't even start looking around elsewhere, because habits just make us want to do the easy things. Okay, and so advertisers, they understand your habits, they understand my habits really much more probably than I ever used to, and now I feel at least I can compete in a relatively fair fight with the advertisers. But what we're going to do about habits is to give you the keys to the door about how to control habits and habitual behaviour. People have lots of habits. Actually, companies have lots of habits. Some companies make decisions incredibly slowly. Some companies are very much about environment. Some people are very much, they have habitual behaviours that they go through, and they never question them. They can't even actually remember why they got them, but they do them. And societies have social habits as well, and societal habits, where there becomes an ongoing, just expected way of working. And we've seen one of those in the UK, where unfortunately, when Princess Diana sadly passed away, there was a vast outpouring of emotion that had never happened before. And actually, since that time, it's happened a great number of times, because people, even though they haven't met people or understood people or had any experience of people, there's a part of the societal habit that's meant it's got much more acceptable and almost expected that there have been more outpourings of public sympathy in some of these ways. It's just really interesting to see the way that societies do this. But in the UK, the top 10 habits are actually swearing, not listening, that's not listening, I'll say that one more time, not listening, biting people's nails, your own ideally, eating chocolate, procrastinating, waiting, hesitating, not starting things. And it's just such a habit that people have got. Not brushing your teeth twice a day. Drinking alcohol is habitual. Losing one's temper. using social media. I'm sure a number of you will recognise that. Eating fast food. And there are 3 others that make up the top 13. We're actually always complaining about everything. That is such a habitual behaviour, where people get so negative they can't even remember to stop complaining about anything. They only see the negatives. That is all habitual behaviour. Because actually there are so many things in life to rejoice about, so many things to build on, but it's habitual behaviour. Caffeine drinking is another one, and the last one, of course, is not washing your hands after going to the toilet, which, of course, is not particularly hygienic. But as I said earlier on in the videos, common sense is rarely common practice, and you get a lot of that. But the consequences of, the top 10 consequences of habitual behaviour in this country, and the UK and North America is very, very closely joined these days in these things. Depression has come out of a lot of these habits. Weight issues have come out of a lot of these habits. Confidence and self-worth issues have come out of them. Relationship issues, dental problems. There's been a lot of more disharmony in society. Financial problems have become much more common as a result of these behaviours. A lot more family issues, loss of friends and loss of employment are the top 10. So I hope you've written some of those down and made notes in your book, because you want to start thinking about, okay, which ones of those really, really resonate with me? And if you haven't written them all down, rewind the tape and do that little bit again, because you want to write them down. Think about them. Think about, okay, which ones apply to me? Which ones are habits that I've got? And what can I do to change some of those? But a habit is a fantastic thing because it actually follows a real set pattern every time. And this was one of the really important things that I learned and understood in my work about habits. So they start off with these 3 base parts to the process. There's a cue. There's always a trigger that happens, a cue, a trigger. Something clicks it in your mind. So for me, for instance, when I leave the house, that's going out and getting in the car. And as soon as I turn right, my brain kind of goes, well, now I default and I know I'm going to the highway. And so there's a routine that you follow through. And for me, it's that I drive to the highway. I go up there, I go round the roundabout, over the roundabout and down onto the highway. Except for the fact that I don't always do that, but that's the routine that I follow. And then the reward is usually that you've made life easier, you haven't had to think about it, and you've got there safer. But there's a reward that comes out of that. And so you have this trigger, you have this routine, and you have a reward. And over time, your mind gets used to the fact that the same thing always happens, and therefore the reward occurs, and it reinforces the fact, so it just makes it habitual and takes your brain down in terms of the amount of energy and electric waves that are kicking around in your brain and the thinking time that you're doing. However, even technology users understand the concept of habitual behaviour, and one of the reasons why social media and phones and things can be quite addictive and quite bad is to do with the fact that the technologists understand this as well. So you have a cue. I'm going to give you a cue on your mobile phone. So on your mobile phone, when you get an email, you get a little red number, and that's the cue. It's little and it's red and it's there to get your attention, and it's red for a reason. It's there saying, I am here, I am here. And the routine that you learn is you see these numbers, and then you go and look at the email. And so, for instance, if you imagine that it's an email, you could be doing anything, literally anything. You see it and you think, I want to probably check it. So you have a routine, you go in, you stop what you're doing, you go in, you check your email, you see it's nonsense, and then you come back out, and the reward you've got is, well, nothing's gone wrong, nothing's going on. I know I'm safe, I can go back to what I'm doing. But all of a sudden, instead of living the life that you want to live, you're living the life that people who send you emails want you to live. And that's tricky. So you need to develop some different habits. So for instance, for me with my iPhone, I've turned off all the ability for my phone to send me emails unless I go into my mail and ask it to be pulled down. So all the push functionality has been turned off, and it only goes in when I go in, because I don't want to be stopped from doing the things that I love to be doing at the time. I want to be really present and thinking about it, and I want to manage these habits. Okay, but equally, another good habit that we've talked about is I'm going to sit at the table and I'm going to eat. Okay, if I'm going to eat, that's the cue. Eat time. It's food time and it's time to have a habit. Okay, get my app out, put my food in. The reward I get is that I know that I will not have gone over my calories accidentally for the day, because it's very, very deliberate, and I take control of the habits that I have in my life. There is masses of content that we've just talked about there. You may need to play some of this back a couple of times, but it's really important that you do that. So one of the things that I'd like you to think about now is we've all got hundreds of habits, and I've listed a fair number of potential habits that you can have. But either doing it quietly on your own or doing it with somebody who knows you really, really well, try and write down the 20 habits that you think that you've got, whether they be good or bad. It doesn't matter, just write down 20 of your habits. And the real reason that I want you to do this is because I want you to become aware of your own habitual behaviour. Once you become aware of your habitual behaviour, and you become aware of the fact that you've got a cue, that you've got a trigger, that you've got this routine that goes on, and then you get a reward at the end of it, it becomes much, much easier to start thinking about how we can manage our habits. So that's really important that you do this piece and sit down and write those 20 habits of your own. But the next question that always comes out of this is, what is actually the difference between a habit, and when does a habit become a craving? And addiction is becoming a massive subject in society. I mean, the kinds of things that people are addicted to, many and vary, whether it be from gambling, whether it be from pornography, whether it be from coffee, whether it be from drugs, it doesn't matter. Alcohol is a massive one. Addiction has become a major subject, and it's an extreme version of a habit loop. And I wanted to talk to you about that, because we're all vulnerable to different things, but they are habits. And the folks at Alcoholics Anonymous, when they sat down and devised some of their early thinking about how to change some of the habits of alcoholism, really clearly understood that they needed to change the habits for people. So people who say that they don't go into a public house or into a bar, the reason that they don't go in there is because it's a protection to stop them from 20 or 30 really bad habits that they've got, and therefore they stay away from all the cues. And this is the thinking that needs to happen in your own mind about, where are you vulnerable on your food journey? How can I put in place protections to stop myself going into some of these really dangerous and damaging habitual behaviours? So the thing about a craving is when somebody is looking forward to the reward so much that actually they start looking forward to the reward before they've done the routine. So in fact, take coffee addiction as an example. I'm boiling the kettle, I'm really looking forward to having a coffee, really, really looking forward to having a coffee. Actually, having a coffee has become irrelevant. At this point, a craving, it's absolutely about, I just want a coffee. I don't know why I want a coffee, I just want a coffee. It's all about the excitement and the thinking about the reward. And when that craving actually becomes an addiction, is when the same facet of behaviour exists, that actually, I just want the coffee, give me the coffee. And you're so committed to having the drink that it actually means it doesn't matter what the costs, it doesn't matter how illegal or damaging, and taking drug addiction is a classic example, even if you had to go and steal to get the money to do that, the desire to have the reward is so strong that actually you have to see the routine through. And so seeing clearly, there's habits which are good, can be good, there's cravings which are rarely good, and then there's addictions which are very, very rarely good. It's all about the order of these three things. And you can do lots of further reading on the subject of habits. It really is an incredibly powerful tool, and I want you to think about this. But in terms of a number of us that sit there and go, I'm really craving chocolate, actually one of the things that we need to do is actually get the reward for chocolate to occur before the routine. So almost nearly, if you have a cue that says, I want to have some chocolate and I want to eat this, there's a routine that you need to go through, and you need to actually sit down very quietly and gently and enjoy the taste of the chocolate. Think about the taste of the chocolate. Make it so that the enjoyment that you're having is because you're eating the chocolate, not because you're looking forward to eating the chocolate. And that's what some of the difference is about how people get to enjoy their food in the moment. So you hear lots of advice about chew your food properly so that you digest it properly, but it's so that you enjoy the sensation of actually eating rather than looking forward to eating, because looking forward to eating, whilst nothing wrong, has a whole series of habits that sit there that drive you to other behaviours. And what does it make you do? 9 times out of 10, makes you snack. 9 times out of 10, it makes you snack. And so it's really important that we all understand, why is it that certain habits happen? Now I'll give you another example from my own life. Before I had learned to control my habits much better, if I got stressed, the first time I would realise that I was stressed would be when I was halfway through eating a full loaf of bread. I just love bread. For me, that was the thing, that was my stress release. For some people it's chocolate, for other people insert what that thing might be for them. But actually, what I learned to do was to start thinking about whenever something's just happened, where I've done something that is not in my long-term interest, that's not about supporting my goals, that's not about supporting my dreams, not about supporting the why, I immediately know that's happened as a result of the fact that my habits have taken me into my subconscious. And so what I immediately do is I think about what happened before. What happened to me immediately before I started eating the bread. And you actually come across the thing, which is the cue, which is the trigger that made you understand. So it may be, for instance, that you'd had an argument. And of course, if, for instance, that you have an argument and you know that when you have an argument, it sets off some kind of routine in you, the way that you're able to manage this, you will never change the cue, because the triggers will always happen, and you'll never change the feeling of reward, but you can change the routine. And so now, for me, if I find myself getting stressed, the routine is actually that I now go and have a decaffeinated coffee. Now, I've taken caffeine out of my diet because actually I think clearer without the caffeine. I have skim milk. It doesn't do any damage to me long term in terms of where we are. I don't get stressed very often anywhere these days. But the key part to me is that eating a whole loaf of bread seriously damages my weight goals and seriously damages my ability to meet my long-term visions and desires. Actually, having a cup of coffee doesn't. It just means that I'm having a decaffeinated coffee, and it's great. And so then I am able to reignite my brain, and we'll come on to that in a separate session. But the whole point about what I've done is I've changed the routines of my habits. So I told you the story about the roundabout, of course. Now, because I'm aware that it was habitual behaviour, I never go to the wrong place. Because when I leave, all of a sudden I've got a routine in there that says, where exactly are you going? Not kind of roughly where you're going, but where exactly are you going? And now I drive there, and I'm much more intentional about what I do. So this is an exercise where you need to practice it. And you'll tend to find, as I say, look for things when something's gone wrong, and then think immediately beforehand, and you will find that there will be a habit that will be making you do something that you'd never really planned to do. And how we crack these habits becomes very, very important. And I tell you, the power that you gain when the first time you realise that you've been doing something because you've been in your subconscious mind and it's been habitual behaviour that's made you do something, and you've changed it, it's a wonderful day. Because all of a sudden you know that you can change any of your habits. So I went from kind of quite often being late to being much more on time. I went from being not quite so tidy to being really tidy, because I started changing all of my habits. I went from leaving the dishes out and washing them later to putting them in the dishwasher straight away. I went to. Better financial outcomes come as a result of that, because you start making longer term decisions about, well, actually, I'll save a bit more because the future, these things come. I want good health goals in the long term. Actually, I want good financial goals in the long term as well. And so you see how it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And this whole layering of changing how habits work is just foundational in what we can do. So honestly, do not worry about the fact that we've all got habits that we need to change. Every one of us, every person watching this course will have habits that need to change. So don't find yourself getting frustrated that you're failing or falling off the wagon, because actually all that's happening is you're confronting another subconscious behaviour, and you need to work out why. What is it that's going on that means you can stop? And then off you go. Don't be disappointed in yourself. That's just subconscious behaviour reaffirming to yourself that you want to be a victim. And you're not a victim. You're absolutely in control of every one of these habits. You can rewire them. It's not just about weight. This is about all of your life. Every single part of it. You can intentionally have different relationships. I mentioned earlier on about the fact that I have the kind of fun of speaking to people about, did you know we did that all the time? I found myself when responding to my own wife about when she'd send me a text saying something like, love you. And the temptation to just quickly send back a text that says, love you too, is huge. But I never do it now, because that will be habitual. And I want to have a different relationship. I want to have a closer relationship. So I have 1,000 other words that I can use, except that. And it's about becoming really quite deliberate and making my mind step up and really make lots of good decisions. So I feel so much happier now I understand how habits happen and how I can control them. Now, it's a long session that we've done today, but honestly, you need to take control of your habits, or your habits will absolutely control you. This session you're probably going to need to listen to 2-3 times. You're going to need to write lots of notes because you're going to build on them, and your own knowledge and insight on this subject will really grow. If you find this a difficult subject, just keep working it, understand the 3-part pattern, that it's about the trigger, it's about the routine, and it's about the reward. And you'll start finding things in your life where you recognise those 3 things. And all of a sudden, it will just get easier and easier and easier. And the more you do this, the more you'll find that you make certain food choices for no discernible reason other than it was habitual. And if you find yourself doing that, put a healthier alternative in. You can control every bad food that you've ever eaten. You can control in this way. And part of the reason why we say this is about making sure that you have changes in your way of thinking that last a lifetime is exactly this. It's all about, in your mind, knowing clearly what you want, the routines that you need to put in place, the habits that you need to put in place that positively support you, and changing the ones that take you in the wrong direction. It's that simple. But I tell you that the level of profound change that can happen as a result of this piece of knowledge is huge. I mean, absolutely huge. Change your financial future, change certainly your health future, change the number of years you get to live here. And it's that fundamental. So really think about it, play this video multiple times, and make sure that you keep building these notes. I know I bang on about you writing the notes and writing them, but read them, reread them, read them again, keep writing them down. It's in your head, it will be growing, the knowledge will be growing, and it will be fine. So the next session that we're going to be dealing with is about movement and activity. You'll notice I don't talk about exercise deliberately, it's about movement and activity. And we've talked historically about food and calories in. We now need to talk about how we burn them. So this is the next side of what we're going to do. So thanks ever so much. Sorry it's been a longer video this time. I did say that it would be a longer one. We'll be back to normal view of the world of keeping them sort of 10, 12, 15 minutes kind of distance from an ongoing point here. But this one was just too big to break up into too many parts. Thanks ever so much. Look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.